ladies and gentlemen, is going to be quite short. I've been involved in different ways with both prisoners of conscience and the Iran Tribunal, and have come from a background of being an ordinary lawyer and then landing up doing quite a lot of international criminal work on both sides of the court, prosecuting, representing governments, representing and trying to represent victims in one court and another. And I've come to the view that informal tribunals are a great deal more important, both for the past, the present and the future, than may have been understood or may presently be understood. Dealing with the past, the two most famous informal tribunals, the Russell Tribunal on Vietnam and perhaps the Comfort Women Tribunal, dealing with the atrocities committed against women from many countries by the Japanese in the Second World War, are more or less forgotten. You ask 99 people out of 100, properly educated and so on, people, probably 999 out of 1,000, they'll know nothing of these tribunals, and at present care less. And yet, in decades, centuries, or even millennia to come, those two records may be the only evidence-based records of truly appalling events that were suppressed from contemporary examination by either immense power, in the case of Vietnam, or the use of immense power in political control, in the case of what was done at Tokyo, or to be precise, what was not done, that allowed the emperor to escape and women not to be referred to or considered at all as victims. And if these two records are the only records properly based on evidence to the extent that they were, then they will become immensely important. The Iran Tribunal, much more recent, shows both the present and the future significance, in my view, of this type of tribunal. Not just because it's going to be doing the same thing, probably, as those earlier tribunals, to leave the only evidence-based record that there may be, but for another reason, which is really, I think, the subject of our first contribution this morning. Let me explain the significance, in my view, slowly. This tribunal, and others that are being developed or can be developed in line with its format, is able to deal with particular conflicts, and does. Is able to deal with particular victims, is able to deal with particular perpetrators and the way they became perpetrators, and does. But that is probably, when people will look back, only a very small part of its real significance, which, in my view, comes from the timing of this tribunal and the timing of where we are now being about 20 years after something, but not the introduction of international criminal tribunals, important though they have been. It comes 20 years, roughly, after the global use of the internet. And this tribunal has shown that the citizen, let down by international and national institutions, disregarded as victims when it suits international organizations to disregard particular groups of victims, the citizen at low cost and without any difficulty at all can set the record of events that they need to set. And even though setting the record may not come with criminal sanction for particular offenders, two things are, I think, entirely clear. First, there is at least a chance that if you set a good record of integrity, evidence-based, of events that it does not suit the international community to deal with by formal mechanisms, there is an improved chance that people will be brought to book by those institutions or others, national or international. Second, well, before we come to second, let's remember a very important recent public pronouncement on the departure from office of Nave Pillay, who had the courage to say that which people in her office perhaps are never going to have the courage to say when in office, but had the courage to say that the shortcomings, maybe the disregard of the Security Council and its associated bodies had led to, I think, hundreds of thousands of avoidable deaths. That was an extraordinary statement to make, however true, and however readily understood by the people we forecast will be with us today. Now, I mention that because the second way in which informal tribunals may have an immense effect is that they may make it impossible in the future, or less easy, for international institutions that have power to deal with the things that informal tribunals choose to do, make it much less easy for them to do nothing. If, as implied by Nave Pillay, the interests of victims are always pretty much second to the interest of geopolitics, whatever that word means, if they are, then seeing other bodies doing what you should be doing and being respected by the citizens of the world for doing that is likely to be a very great stimulus indeed to get people to honour their obligations. And sadly, that last observation of mine, but one, that victims can be disregarded, is, I think, something that ought to be in the back of our minds at all times. We like to think that the victims who attract headlines because of images or because a celebrity has gotten stuck, the celebrity's approval on a particular conflict, are simply representative of the concern we, our leaders and our international leaders, feel for victims and will reflect in their doings. Sadly, we may conclude that is not necessarily or even remotely the case. When you look at not the conflicts that have attracted attention in the world today, but note the conflicts and the victims of conflicts that are disregarded, or disregarded as much as possible because there's no real political purpose in pursuing them. North Korea, Burma, the Rohingyas, for example. But there are others. You can perhaps realize that things are not quite as straightforward as the ordinary citizen is led to believe, and that things are much more in line with what Nave Pillay explained in her farewell address. And so with that in mind, it seems to me, there are great things that may emerge from the work of informal tribunals, even if we have to have faith in them now, because their effect will be only visible or palpable in years and longer periods of time to come. So, welcome to this conference. I hope you enjoyed and participated in it. And I shall now, I think, because I haven't been instructed to do the introduction, so perhaps Lynn Parker turn to our first contributor.
Thank you. Just a little housekeeping note for everyone, but we will have 4 speakers this morning.